So today is Good Friday. We want to pick up where we left off yesterday, looking at these most important days of the life of Jesus. Today, one of the holiest days of the year, of course, we know Jesus will die upon the cross for our salvation. So we left off yesterday, late in the night, where Jesus had been betrayed by Judas, one of his apostles, been taken into custody and dragged in the middle of the night before the high priests Annas and Caiaphas. And today, having been awake pretty much all night, he's going to be taken before Pilate for his judgment. So we read in John chapter 18, "Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the praetorium." The praetorium is where Pilate lived, the governor's palace. It was early. They themselves did not enter, so that they might not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." This was to fulfill the word which Jesus had spoken, to show by what death he was to die. So we see Jesus here being judged by Pilate in the praetorium, and Pilate recognizes that Jesus is innocent. He doesn't want to hand him over to be crucified. He knows this is going beyond his own authority. He knows Jesus has done nothing wrong, but the crowds keep pressing him over and over and over him. Crucify him, crucify him. Maybe you remember being in church on Palm Sunday or on Good Friday when the gospel is read of Jesus' passion. And we have to take the parts of the crowd and say, crucify him. And it hurts deep inside of us. But we know that every time we sin, that's really what we say, crucify him. So Pilate succumbs, he gives in to the pressure of the crowd to crucify Jesus, and he turns him over. His wife even comes out and tells him, "I was warned in a dream, have nothing to do with this innocent man." But he won't listen. He still goes ahead, he gives in to the pressure of the crowd, he hands Jesus over to be crucified. So Pilate thinks maybe it'll be enough if I just have Jesus scourged, have him whipped. Right? Now, this was actually a really severe punishment. Usually when the Romans whipped somebody, when they scourged someone, they really got him to like a point, within or really close to killing him. And so Pilate hopes that just, having Jesus scourged or whipped, this will, pacify, this will satisfy the people who want him to be crucified. So he does that, he brings him back out and says, "Here he is, behold your king." And they shout, "Crucify him, crucify him." So like I said, Pilate eventually gives in. Jesus has to go to his passion, has to take up and carry this cross up the hill of Calvary, already having been whipped to, very close to his own death already. Normally, one wouldn't come right after the other. So Jesus takes up his cross and he goes to Calvary. If we're familiar with praying the Stations of the Cross, the Via Crucis, we know just what a terrible path this was for Jesus to carry this cross. Along the way, he meets some different people. He meets Simon of Cyrene, who the soldiers press into service to help him carry the cross. We can see ourselves in Simon. We're called to take up the cross and carry our own sufferings and difficulties along with Jesus. He meets his mother Mary, who is always close to him there, and she shares in his sorrow. And he meets the women of Jerusalem who are there weeping for him, and he tells them to weep not for him, but for themselves and for their children, because of this terrible day that's coming that will be so terrible for everyone, of seeing Jesus crucified. So we continue reading in John's Gospel. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the Place of a Skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him, with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote a title and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." We've probably seen this on the crucifix above Jesus. It says INRI. That stands for Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum. In Latin, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. We hear too, when the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and made 4 parts, one for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was without seam, woven from top to bottom. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to seize whose it shall be." This was to fulfill the scripture, "They parted my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." So Jesus suffers one humiliation after another humiliation. It's not enough. He's whipped within an inch of his life. It's not enough that he has to carry his own instrument of torture up the hill to Calvary. It's not enough that he has to be stripped naked before the crowds. They even throw dice. They gamble away his clothing to the soldiers. This also, we hear, fulfills the prophecies, all the prophecies in the Old Testament about Jesus, which he fulfilled in every one of his sufferings. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. Now John, who's writing this gospel, is actually talking about himself. The disciple whom Jesus loved is John. He's modest about that, this close relationship that he had with Jesus. But John also leaves himself nameless in this gospel so that we can see ourselves in him. We too are disciples loved by Jesus. So when Jesus looks at John and says, "Behold your mother," he's looking at every one of us. From the cross, he gave Mary to us to be our mother, to console us in our sorrow over Jesus' death. He wants us to, like John, take Mary into our own homes, let her be our spiritual mother. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A bowl full of vinegar stood there, so they put a sponge full of the vinegar on hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. One last humiliation before he dies. Instead of giving him water, they give him vinegar to drink. Other versions of the gospel say Jesus cried out with a loud voice and said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And then he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." From the cross, Jesus was ready to forgive. He recognized his persecutors didn't really know what they're doing. They didn't recognize him as God, and he forgave them. Jesus dies out of mercy for us to forgive our sins, to forgive the worst sins we could possibly imagine, even to forgive the sins of the people who crucified him, who did the worst thing possible, who killed the Son of God himself. He wanted to forgive even them from the cross. Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection, which we'll experience in 2 days, gives us the possibility of the forgiveness of our sins. He thought of each one of you and me as he died upon the cross. He thought about the sins by which we would betray him, as he'd been betrayed by Judas and his other friends, and he forgave us too. He desires to share that mercy with us, especially in the sacrament of confession. So if we ever think that anything that we've done is beyond Jesus' power to forgive, don't forget that he even forgave the people who crucified him on that terrible day. Since it was the day of preparation before the big feast of the Passover, in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, again, the feast of the Passover, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. This blood and water flowing out of Jesus' side is a symbol of baptism, the sacraments of the church. There's water coming out in addition to blood because the soldiers pierced his heart, and there's this sack of water around our legs on his left side, right? It's this the heart of Jesus is pouring out on us, and that's the forgiveness that we receive in baptism and in confession. We've been bathed in Jesus' blood, made washed clean from all of our sins. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who at first came to him by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. They took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb where no one had been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, as the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. This, according to another one of the Gospels, is the tomb of this man, Joseph of Arimathea, who came and got the body of Jesus. We see these people who love Jesus doing this great thing of taking his body, lovingly caring for him. And we too likewise should always want to care for those who are suffering, to show respect toward those who have died. This is one of the corporal works of mercy, burying the dead. So when we lovingly participate in a funeral or a burial or go to visit someone's grave, we can imitate Joseph of Arimathea, who took care of the sacred body of Jesus. So on this day, Good Friday, we've lived some of the most sad mysteries of our faith, the torture, crucifixion, and death of Jesus. We do this, though, with hope, knowing that this isn't going to be the end of the story, and knowing that Jesus suffers all of this out of love for us. So today, we should do a good examination of conscience, call to mind the sins of our own life for which Jesus has died. Thank him for dying for those sins. If there's any we haven't brought to confession yet, we should resolve to make a good confession as soon as possible. Allow him to pour that sacred blood upon us in the sacrament of confession, where the healing mercy of the cross is extended even to us. God bless you on this holy day.